I have noticed for a long time that people on the internet claim that women often say, I have a boyfriend, if someone approaches or speaks to them. Has this ever happened to you? Or is it simply a partially true narrative or joke? If it has occurred to you or a friend, what was the context? I personally have never witnessed this and don't know anyone to whom it has happened, so I am very curious. Story 1. One time, I was at the gas station buying a coffee when I noticed a girl in the next line over who was also buying a coffee. She looked to be in her late 20s or early 30s, with a somewhat hippie style and a disheveled appearance. As I waited, I noticed she was digging in her purse and pockets, trying to find enough money to pay, while the cashier looked annoyed. When it was my turn, it seemed she was about 20 cents short and on the verge of giving up. I told my cashier I would pay for her coffee too. After I paid, I raised my coffee in a cheers motion towards her. As I turned to walk away, she loudly said, "I'm married." I just kept walking. Story 2. A girl at a party dropped a pack of cigarettes. I picked them up to give them back, and she told me that she had a boyfriend. I replied, "Good for you, you dropped these." I could tell she felt a little bad. Story 3. I approached a girl at my college. I was new to the school and trying to find out where my class would be held. I asked, "Can I ask you a question?" She responded, "I'm taken, so no, you can't." I replied, "That's great, but I'm just wondering where this room is." She said, "Sorry, I don't want to help you." Oh, okay. Story 4. A lady cyclist had a flat tire on the bike path. I offered to fix it since I always carry tools and a spare tire, and she was in the middle of nowhere, at least 5 miles from a road. She responded, "No thanks, I have a boyfriend." I said, "Okay, but I can have you up and running in 5 minutes." She repeated, "I said I have a boyfriend." I replied, "Okay, ma'am, enjoy your walk back." Story 5. I work as a server at a fine dining restaurant. I got a new table with 1 woman and 2 menus. I assume her boyfriend went to the restroom, but I still went to greet the table. I walked over and said, "Hi, welcome in." She cut me off and said she was there with her boyfriend. I replied, "Well, can I get you both some water while you settle in?" I thought to myself, I'm not here to hit on you. I just want you to enjoy your meal, drink, and pay your bill. That's it. Story 6. A woman dropped her ID at the bar shortly after coming in. I picked it up and said, "Excuse me, miss." She turned to me, looked me up and down, and replied, "Thanks, but I have a boyfriend." I responded, "Congratulations, you dropped your ID." I looked at her friend across from her with a puzzled expression. I put her ID back on the ground where it was. Then she went to order a drink, and the bartender asked for her ID. She couldn't find it and was asked to leave. Story 7. I was delivering for UPS, wearing all brown, when someone at a Ben Franklin loading dock randomly told me that she has a boyfriend. I approached with the clipboard for her to sign, and she said it without looking at me, only looking up and blushing afterward. I simply said, "Congratulations," and asked her to sign before heading to my next stop. Story 8. I was in a new city for an interview. On the first night, I was in a cafe where there was only one other lady present, aside from the staff. I approached her to ask for directions. Before I got close, she stared at me and spoke loudly, "I'm taken, and I don't want to go on a date with you anyway." The next morning, I arrived at the clinic, and she was seated at the front desk. I got a slight dig back because the recruiter was there to welcome me and asked how my stay in the city was so far. I casually replied, "It's a nice city, but people seem rude here. I tried to ask for directions from this lady last night, and she just yelled at me." Story 9. I met a girl in my summer school class. We communicated outside of school and hung out at lunch. One day, we decided to skip class and go to the movies. Her mother picked us up and complimented me. We went to see Hellboy, and at one point, I kissed her on the cheek since I already had my arm around her shoulder. She looked at me and said, "I have a boyfriend, but I want to kiss you back." It became awkward after that. We walked back to her house, where I met her little sister, who claimed that I had a lisp, which I do not. Story 10. I helped a girl at work retrieve something from the top shelf. I noticed the safety hazard of her climbing on the rack to reach it, so I said, "Move," and grabbed it for her. I handed it to her and she replied, I have a boyfriend." I responded, "Good for you." Story 11. Last week, I was at the gym on the only treadmill with a ceiling fan above it. I had less than 60 seconds left on my cool down. A woman approached and noticed I was on the treadmill she wanted. I paused the music in my earbuds and signaled to her that I was almost finished. She came back to say, "I'm not interested. I have a boyfriend." I just laughed and replied, "Okay." Story 12. A woman left her phone on top of her car at a gas station. I made a gesture indicating talking on the phone and pointed to her roof. She rolled down the window and mentioned she had a boyfriend. I replied, "He'll have a hard time calling you when your phone falls off your car." She got out, grabbed the phone, and we laughed. She then started to flirt with me. I said, "I have a girlfriend," and left. Story 13. I worked in a fast food place when a new girl started. My boss asked me to show her the setup. I gave her a smile of encouragement and she replied, "I have a boyfriend." I responded, "Yeah, and?" She said, "Well, you smiled at me, so you're flirting." Story 14. Oh yes. I usually listen to my headphones, but I once stopped a girl to tell her that her shoelace was untied. Without looking at me, she said she had a boyfriend, then looked at me and said she didn't. She then blushed as I reiterated that her shoelace was untied. It was funny enough to remember. Story 15. I asked a woman if she liked a song, and she told me she had a boyfriend. I wasn't interested in her romantically, and she struck me as a callous person. Story 16. It feels like whenever I casually strike up a conversation with a woman, the comment comes up within about 30 seconds at most. It usually doesn't feel forced, but the consistency is strange. Story 17. I was at work in the break room and introduced myself to a new female employee while making small talk. I wasn't particularly interested in her romantically, and I generally don't interfere in others' relationships, so I had no intention of hitting on her. I must have stepped on a nerve or something, as she announced that she and her boyfriend were going somewhere that weekend. She had a puzzled look on her face when I started asking about her boyfriend. I had no idea what she was trying to convey at that moment because I had no intentions, and honestly, this situation hasn't happened to me all that often. In fact, it might be the only time. Story 18. I had a coworker who constantly mentioned that she had a boyfriend during random conversations. Another female coworker asked her why she felt the need to bring it up, as none of the men ever seemed interested in her that way. It was really awkward. Story 19. My family and I recently moved to a new town. I was looking for a restaurant and asked a woman if she knew where it was. Before I could even say, "Excuse me," she replied, "I have a boyfriend," and walked away. I was still pretty young, so I didn't really process what had happened, but later on, I laughed at it. Story 20. She told me that after we had already been intimate a few times, I felt really bad and never wanted to be the other person. Story 21. When I was in college, I took a class where the girl next to me and I were comparing notes during class, sort of helping each other. At the end of class, the teacher assigned us a project and said we should exchange numbers with another student to work on it together. After class, I approached her in the hallway and asked for her number. She replied, "I have a boyfriend." I paused for a moment, dumbfounded, and said, "For the project, I also have a girlfriend." Story 22. A girl yelled at me that she had a boyfriend in college after I said hello to her. This was after she did not show up for a date a few days earlier, which she had enthusiastically accepted when I asked her out. Story 23. A few years ago, my girlfriend and I were driving during a winter storm when we saw a woman digging her car out with a shovel. My girlfriend pulled up and asked if she needed help. The woman responded, "I have a boyfriend." So we drove off. Story 24. I have a friend who sees this as an invitation. He has even tried to get a number in front of the boyfriend, and it has worked. Story 25. My husband and kids went out for pizza. As we were leaving, the kids and I went out before my husband. When he walked out, two girls, likely in their early 20s, were right behind him. He held the door for them and let them out first. One girl looked at him and said in a snotty tone that she had a boyfriend. He didn't respond, but when they realized he was with his family and saw us waiting, she looked embarrassed. Story 26. My flatmate at university had some friends from back home come to visit. We went out clubbing, and one of the girls who was visiting ended up spending most of the night dancing and flirting with me. We were both being flirtatious all night. Everyone else left, but we stayed until closing, dancing together. Eventually, it was time to leave, and we headed back to the student halls with our arms around each other's waists. Can you take me back to my friend's flat instead of yours? I've got a boyfriend. I took her back to her friend's flat, and she ran off to find her twin sister, who was also visiting. I found our mutual friend. So we were dancing all night. I thought it was going well. Then on the way back, she told me she has a boyfriend. Yeah, he's a bouncer, a massive guy. He put someone in the hospital a few years back. Story 27. This happened to me a lot when I was younger. I was pretty obnoxious in the way I spoke to and approached women, even if it wasn't meant to be an approach. I think more women just felt the need to turn away a potential advancement on my part. I was also, admittedly, pretty rough around the edges. These days, I don't think I've had anyone mention, I have a boyfriend, in about a decade, but I'm sure women casually bring up their partners in conversation just to make it clear. I do the same thing when I can tell a woman might be picking up on a vibe from me. Story 28. It depends on the intention and situation. For example, I have experienced this occasionally at a bar or club. In that context, it makes sense because the person is essentially indicating that they are not interested or available. In other contexts where it feels random, I simply laugh it off. My go-to line is, "Congratulations," but statement of what I wanted to talk about. Story 29. I have always been friendly, like a Boy Scout. Women often thought I was flirting with them. Younger women sometimes have difficulty distinguishing my intentions. This is where being polite to others sets the tone. Story 30. I was going to take a test for work at a college in town and didn't know where the correct building was. Clearly, I was out of place, not in my 20s, at a college looking for a building when two college-aged girls walked by. I asked them for help finding the correct building. The blonde I asked pulled the "I have a boyfriend" card on me while her friend gave me a disapproving stare. I calmly replied that I have a test, but I'm not looking to cheat on either, so could they just tell me where the room is on campus? I got a laugh and eventually found my way. Story 31. I was asking for contact information for work. I think she was really nervous and just said it reflexively. I just stared at her, and it took a couple of seconds for her to realize what she just did. It was a funny moment, we both laughed, and it's no big deal. I'm only sharing to let you know that women experience this sometimes as well. Story 32. I've never realized it, but I've never heard anyone say this in real life. It's strange. I talk to women regularly. Do I just give off uninterested energy? I do have hobbies traditionally considered feminine, like cooking and sewing. My wife, however, has to mention that she's married often. Being a woman in the Navy, she is constantly approached at work and during deployments. She has been asked if her marriage is serious. I don't need to know. Someone complained to her superior that she was leading them on by being polite. She had a cook restrict her food because he felt she was leading him on by wearing a wedding band. She decorates her workspace with photos of me from bodybuilding competitions, at the gym, and in uniform. Yet, guys will still hit on her when she's trapped on a ship in the middle of nowhere. She basically has to carry a knife while she's out because some of those men have no respect. Story 33. I have experienced this several times in the past 6 months. I actually prefer it over other excuses when I approach someone, even if it means I'm not interested. It allows the person to decline quickly while helping me save face. Story 34. I was in a supermarket when a woman asked if I could reach something on the top shelf for her. I did so, handed it to her, and she said, "Thanks. Anytime," I replied, smiling. "Sorry, I have a boyfriend," she responded. I was on my game that day and replied, Was he on a lower shelf then? Story 35. Wow, you all don't have it easy. Here in France, they will at least wait until the conversation has had a proper start to mention or hint at their boyfriends. And it's not like we carry a reputation for being particularly polite. Story 36. I don't have one of those. I do have a story about a girl noticing me and saying that I was cute, then clarifying that she was gay before I could react, stating it was just an observation. Apparently, she makes these observations when she truly means them. This essentially became her preferred greeting for me. Story 37. I was at Subway, where they have a loyalty plan that allows you to enter your phone number or scan a QR code on your phone to earn points. One day, while I was checking out, the young lady, who appeared to be in her early 20s, skipped the step where you enter your phone number. Since I was buying several sandwiches, I wanted to ensure I received my points. I held up the QR code on my phone and asked, "Phone number?" Her response was, "I have a boyfriend." Story 38. I chased a woman down in the parking lot. From about 30 feet away, I shouted, "Excuse me, miss." In a scratchy voice, she exclaimed, "I have a boyfriend." Understandable. Have a nice day. She placed her phone on the curb and went about her day. Story 39. The girl started a new job and was introduced to various teams in our department. In each introduction, her boyfriend was mentioned. When they came to our team, we all replied that we were either married or engaged, which took her off guard. It was priceless, as the person showing her around was giving us confused looks. Story 40. I experienced a situation similar to a meme I saw. I stopped by a girl's car and asked her to lower the window. She instantly said, "I have a boyfriend." I then informed her that her tire was flat. She asked me to help her change it, and I replied, "Ask your boyfriend to help you." Seriously, though, some women are becoming ridiculous in this regard. Story 41. I am actually guilty of this and felt awkward doing it. I was walking my dog by my apartment building when a man approached me, asking about her as she was excited for attention. We started chatting and discovered we had a lot in common. He asked if I wanted to hang out sometime, and I said sure. Then I said, "Sorry, you don't know me well yet, but I'm super awkward about this." He replied, "Aren't we all a little awkward?" I responded, "True. I'm just warning you because I might struggle with this. You seem so nice, and I do not think you are being flirty or inappropriate, but in case we hang out sometime and you try to make a move, I wanted you to know I have a boyfriend." He said, "Cool, good to know. Who knows, I could have made a move, but now that I know, I'll be respectful." I replied, "Awesome, thank you. I just didn't want it to seem like I was shouting, 'I have a boyfriend,' just because you were talking to me." We both laughed, and now we are friends. Story 42. I was filling out a form before cell phones and asked the woman next to me what the date was, and you know the rest. Story 43. I was a teenager when it happened. I think the woman was in her early 20s, but I forget. I remember approaching her from behind and saying, "Excuse me, miss?" or something similar, and she responded with, "I have a boyfriend," when she turned around. The anger on her face when I burst into giggles, then full laughter, was remarkable. It was the first time I was exposed to that. Story 44. In a random sociology class during undergraduate studies, the professor was discussing a concept and initiated a discussion around it. A student decided to share her boyfriend's views on the matter, even though he was not present in class. You might think this is not unusual, but given the context of the topic and what she said, it felt very much out of place. Unfortunately, I cannot recall the specific details. This was not an isolated incident. The number of times I have sat in class and a student brings up her boyfriend is quite overwhelming. Story 45. I was working a job where we went from store to store and counted inventory. I was counting boys' t-shirts, just minding my own business, when the girl at the rack near me asked, "Is Spider-Man in the Justice League?" I think she was counting Justice League shirts and a Spider-Man one had snuck in. She asked in my general direction and I was the only other person there, so she must have been asking me. I told her that the Justice League was a DC Comics team, which included Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman, while Spider-Man was a character from Marvel Comics. She then said, "Oh, we love the Marvel movies. We are such big fans. We can't wait to see the next one," really emphasizing the word we. She went out of her way to tell me, someone who hadn't spoken to her or even glanced in her direction, that she had a boyfriend. Story 46. I was invited to a friend's party at a bar but didn't know anyone in his circle. I went to get a drink and one of his friends was there. I said, "Hi, how do you know X?" She responded that she had a boyfriend. I just laughed and said, "Okay, cool. I have a girlfriend too. There she is over there," and waved to my girlfriend. She was a bit embarrassed but then relaxed. I think it's fine. It's direct and shows they're committed to their partner. So if you are single, they're not wasting your time. Story 47. I appreciate you for asking a lot of refreshing and relevant questions. Story 48. I don't think I've specifically had it said to me. I'm not sure if it counts, but in high school I had a friend, or so I thought, who was one of the popular girls. We were getting quite close, and I had recently experienced heartbreak from my long-term girlfriend. So I really appreciated how nice she and her friends were being to me. It turns out she thought I was gay because I wasn't behaving inappropriately or hitting on her. When they found out I'm not gay, they treated me poorly, because clearly all the creepy jokes they had laughed at while thinking I was gay must not have been jokes. Oh, high school. Story 49. I pulled up next to a lady to let her know that her lights were off. I signaled for her to roll down her window, and the first thing she said was that she had a boyfriend. I replied that was great, I have a wife and her lights were off. I wished her a good day. It was quite funny and the only time it has happened to me. Story 50. A woman at my previous job said this to me after I told her to stop socializing and focus on work. Management had mentioned they were considering firing her because she spent hours flirting with another coworker. I had to explicitly state that I was not attracted to her and that she needed to concentrate on her work instead of socializing. She was upset that she couldn't come to work and flirt all day without doing any actual work. Story 51. I was sitting at a bar when a girl sat down 2 seats away from me. I said hello because it felt strange not to say anything, especially since we were the only people there. She immediately replied, "I have a boyfriend." I told her, "That's okay. I am married." She ordered a beer, drank it quickly, and then left. It was a very unusual encounter. Story 52. I generally avoid women who filter excessively and suddenly have room for me based on superficial criteria. I steer clear of online dating, but in the past, if I saw requirements for height, I disregarded them. I am 6 feet 4 inches tall in combat boots, but I find it frustrating that some people feel they need to filter potential partners based on height. Story 53. I completely understand why this would be hilarious to witness, but as a woman, there's not a week that goes by without a man striking up a casual conversation for any reason other than to flirt. The only time I've ever experienced this was with one guy at a bar. He said, "Hey," and I responded that I had a boyfriend. He replied, "Hey, chill out. I was just going to say I liked your eyeliner." We chatted for a minute, only for him to try to start flirting with me. I told him my boyfriend would be there shortly, and he then proceeded to flirt with my friend, who had indicated at the start of the conversation that she was a lesbian. For clarification, it's obviously not all men, but I can see why it would be funny. Story 54. It has never been relevant to the interaction, which usually makes me laugh. Normal people would draw upon their ability to adapt a conversation and mention their partner in a non-obtrusive way if they were worried about inappropriate flirting or wanted an easy way out. Simply stating, "I have a boyfriend," seems awkward to me. Good for you, I think, is the most normal response. I have never been offended by it. Story 55. I was on the train and saw a girl who attended the same school based on her clothes. A guy was talking loudly on the phone next to her, and I noticed her glancing over, trying not to laugh because his conversation was ridiculous. We both got off the train and I brought it up to her. We started talking and laughing about it. It turned out we were going the same way, so I said I would walk with her, and she replied, "I have a boyfriend." Okay. Story 56. I have never had someone tell me this phrase directly. What I have found is that often, if I find myself in a conversation with women, some will quickly mention their boyfriend, husband, or partner, even if the context doesn't exactly fit. Usually, it comes up unnaturally, but I often go along with it because it is rare for me to be talking with a woman while having a genuine romantic interest in her. Story 57. I was trying to tell her that she had a spider crawling in her hair. Oh well, the girl found out later. The screams were horrendous. Story 58. A friend of mine met a girl, and one day later they had a sexual encounter. He called me to bring Plan B pills to his workplace since that is where it happened. Right after she took the pill, she told him, "I have a boyfriend, and it's serious." Story 59. Once had a coworker who offered me a ride home because she was going that way anyway. She had been smiling and very nice all day, talking with me more than other staff. Normally I would have declined, but it was hot, and I didn't want to walk, so I got into her car. We weren't even out of the parking lot when I started to thank her for the ride, and she mentioned, "I have a boyfriend." Even though the conversation was completely unrelated, I got out and walked home. Felt too uncomfortable to ride after that. Story 60. When I was in university, I was walking home from a friend's house at night. I passed a group of drunk revelers, one of whom told me she had a boyfriend without me saying anything to her. Story 61. I met and chatted with a woman at a cafe around lunchtime while we were eating at adjacent tables. We had a great conversation, and she gave me her number without hesitation. I texted her later in the day, but she responded that she had a boyfriend. However, she flirted with me and provided her real number in person. Story 62. I was at a nightclub standing at the bar when I turned around to see a small guy squaring up to a large man. Something was about to happen, and I was just watching it unfold. The small guy took a swing and got knocked out. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed a tall, thin blonde girl walk over and she said, "What are you staring at? I have a boyfriend, and he's standing right over there." I wish I could say I asked if the boyfriend was the guy who got hit, but unfortunately, I couldn't say anything. I was too busy trying not to laugh at the situation, not to mention the fact that she thought I was trying to flirt with her from a distance while she was standing right next to a very obvious brawl she somehow didn't notice. Story 63. I have never received that treatment, but I have had random women grab my bicep or run their hands up and down my arm, asking me if I am taken. Story 64. It is typically a soft rejection. Saying it early, seemingly at random, means she is heading off a perceived approach. Story 65. It isn't random. It's because they don't want you to discover them. Most likely, they don't really want to talk with you either. Story 66. Someone tried to hug me at a concert recently, and I pushed them away and said I have a boyfriend, only to realize it was a close girlfriend. I felt stupid, but she understood. Story 67. The ones who say that are usually the biggest hypocrites. My friend and I tested it out one day when we went to her house on 2 separate days. Knowing she was playing the innocent card, she performed oral sex and then did the same for him the next night, saying she had never done that for anyone before. Right? Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.